China Reunified. The objectives are 1. Characterize the Sui, Tang, and Sung dynasty. And 2nd, identify innovations and reforms in government, agriculture, and technology that brought periods of growth and prosperity to China. Now, first, beginning with the Sui dynasty. The Han dynasty had collapsed in 220 CE, and we saw a time of political chaos and civil war. We saw across the globe the Roman Empire collapse as well, somewhere around the same time. And so we have an age of political chaos across the globe, which really dismantled the extensive trade that existed throughout the world, particularly along the Silk Road. And so we just see political and economic chaos at the time. But we see emerge a new political unity in 581 CE, particularly under the Sui family. But the second emperor is most famous of this, and he is Sui Yangi. And Sui is... the Sui families are known for their innovations, to be sure, and their solidifications, but this particular emperor was known for his cruelty, that he oppressed the people to achieve greatness. Now, no doubt he is the greatest of this dynasty, but he is most known for the harsh treatment of the workers building the Grand Canal. And he was the one who completed the Grand Canal, which interconnected the Yellow and the Yangtze River, which both flow east-west. And by creating the canal which connects those two rivers, you have a method by which one could travel north-south, which really brings unity to China, which is the most important issue here, because you have a politically tumultuous time, chaos is everywhere, and this allowed for the flowing of goods and trade, particularly rice, from the south to the north. But he used forced labor to build this canal. Many Chinese peasants died in the construction of this Grand Canal, and while needed for the greater unity of China, was done on the backs of many poor people. But more than that, he also led an extravagant and luxurious lifestyle. Most emperors that fall into this are looked upon very harshly with those that are around them, when you have all these parties and drinking and living that extraordinary, extravagant lifestyle. The people that are dying building the thing that you're trying to have bring unity and therefore your prosperity is not looked upon favorably. And so he's remembered as a very cruel ruler. But inevitably, they collapse. The Sui family is inevitably overthrown, and the Tang family comes to new power. So they replace the Sui. And the family ruled for almost 300 years, from 618 to 907. Quite a bit of stretch there. And they primarily brought a new legitimacy and a new unity that the Sui really initiated, but particularly was prosperous for many people. And it really is underpinned by the Confucian ideals that have really remained contiguous through time in China. They instituted the reforms, particularly with the examination office, that allowed for the Confucian examinations to elevate people to political office. Anyone could take them. And so this was in some sense, a great equalizer that allowed people to rise to the top. So examination for holding office, to be sure, allowing for a stable economy by giving land to peasants. So we see a kind of reversal of what the Sui had initiated. The Tang are trying to rectify those issues. More so, they expanded territory to the border of Tibet, really north of the Himalayas, so pushing down south. We see increased conflict with Korea, and Korean other people groups were offered tribute to the Tang dynasty, just offering them goods and money to keep them from invading them, essentially. But we see under Tang Xiuangzong a major shift in this idea. He fell in love with a commoner, in fact, the daughter of a peasant, and poured upon her extravagant gifts. In fact, had celebrations and parties and brought in musicians. He even sent people distant hundreds of miles to bring her fruit every morning. I mean, he seems that he genuinely was infatuated and loved this woman. But all the while, the people around are seeing this as a major issue, particularly when a bloody revolt is going on, led by one of his generals. This was seen as completely inappropriate in his position, and his infatuation had driven him to poor management of China. Ultimately, he demands that she is killed. He, in fact, insists that she come to the palace and she hangs herself on a tree. Now, of course, this is devastating for him, but to maintain power, to maintain his authority, and to maintain the dynasty, it's what was needed. But it's said that he bathed his face in his own tears every morning, thinking of her. So it seems that he was truly in love, but now he had to sacrifice what he loved for the benefit of the dynasty. But ultimately, we see a period of weakness essentially happening during the Tang, and rebellions began to emerge, and he ended up turning to the Uyghurs, a tribe of Turkic warriors to the north, whom China hired to really deal with their military battles, which is problematic, of course, when you turn to an outside group to handle your political problems. Ultimately, we lead to collapse in 907. This, of course, leads to a tumultuous, chaotic time, inevitably set right and set into solidification through the Song dynasty, which lasted from 960 to 1279. And really, this is from a northern incursion into China. And we see major moving of imperial efforts and moving the imperial court to Hangzhou, further south, so as to protect the north from the northern invasions. So it's a political tumultuous time, and they're trying to bring solidity and solidification to the political process and to the political climate, particularly dealing with the north. It's really during the 1200s that we see the Mongols to the north that build a massive empire and try to press into China. And they inevitably controlled all of China after they overthrew the Song dynasty. Now, in general terms, the government and economy of China during these dynasties was prosperous and blossoming. Confucian ideals were really the cement of Chinese culture during this time. And we do see Confucian ideals really as a consistent pattern throughout all of Chinese history. It's a continuity, continuously. But is really the cement that binds these dynasties together, and during this time really shapes the period. The economy grew in size and complexity, to be sure, particularly as the Chinese empire expands, pressing up against the borders of other nations, which leads to the demand for tribute. You also have a civil war. But inevitably during Civil War times, we see the aristocratic families, the elite families, take control of more and more and more land. So we see a rising aristocracy, really, as they're controlling more and more land and more wealth, which inevitably is a deadly cycle, because then you end up having civil war and greater conflict, and then so forth. The people have revolt. And so the question of political tumultuousness and chaos during the time is really a conflict over taxation and territory. Now, there are various technological trades and technological innovations and new revival of trade that really changes the period. One of the most notable inventions is the development of steel, which is a much harder and lighter metal. And it's through the result of mixing cast iron and wrought iron in a blast furnace, which allows for a very lighter, stronger metal, usually used for swords in particular, and sickles. We also see the use of cotton, the growing of cotton, which will allow for the new textiles. We see particularly one of the most important things, the invention of gunpowder. Gunpowder was developed really during the Tang dynasty, and wasn't necessarily used in the sense of a massive cannon in the sense that we think of gunpowder, but was dabbled in early on with new technologies, particularly the fire lance. But Chinese society was also really transforming. One of the most famous voices that kind of characterizes what was happening in China was Marco Polo, the Italian merchant and traveler who wrote a travel narrative about his venture from Italy to China, and described Hangzhou as a paradise full of many pleasures, and described the glory and beauty of the city. Some of the most important entertainments of the time were playing cards, chess. You see the invention of block printing, which allows for more mass production of written word, and allowing then, therefore, for a cheaper way to produce written word, and therefore more consumable written works. But we also see the rise of a scholar gentry that replaced that old aristocracy. That is, we see a new elite that were more scholastic, more intellectual, rather than the landed aristocracy that you might see in a sort of feudal, medieval mindset. And so we see some major shifts in the political structure in that sense as well. We also see the role of women, and for the most part, the role of women is minimal. But there are some few exceptions. Particularly, we have Wu Zhou, which is she's often referred to as Empress Wu, and she is inevitably the empress, but she is actually an attachment to the emperor, his courtesan, his side lady, and so the history says, she had such a lust for power that she strangled her own child and claimed that the wife of the emperor did it, and then the emperor had her exiled, and she became the empress. Now, whether that's true or whether that's a later male historian reading back on her and depicting her as a vile, evil lady because of political power is unclear. But nevertheless, for the most part, females had a lower position in Chinese society still. And so the role of women remained really homemaker, right? From infancy, women would be set for this. And we see also the practice of the dowry, right? The giving of money, goods, or property. And this was given to the husband from the girl's parents, in a certain sense, to take care of her as if she's a burden. And while not necessarily a burden, it was the custom that they would provide the husband with the resources that would be for her and to take care of her. But often poor families just sold their daughters for marriage to wealthier men, which becomes somewhat problematic in our modern mindset, but this was quite normal at the time. So our objectives were, 1, characterize the Song, the Tang, and the Sui, and also, 2nd, identify innovations and reforms in government agriculture, and technology that brought periods of growth and prosperity to China.